Hi, the term triple constraint that has been pretty popular for some period of time, it appears to have lost its luster. That doesn't mean that it isn't important though. And in fact, the triple constraint is typically composed of these three elements. First is scope, which is features. And I'll just write that up there. The next is cost. And then lastly, it's time. The constraint term is used throughout project management. So let's define it. As you can see, this fellow on the right-hand side, kind of roped up, heavily constrained. But the constraint is basically a bottleneck, could be viewed as a restriction or of a limitation. We're back to those symbols that we'd used before. The triple constraint is typically shown as a triangle, where visualization is pretty important to understanding this concept. According to Tony Johnson's superb PMP Exam Success Series Certification Exam Manual, that's a long title for a book, he states that typically all three constraints should be treated with equal importance. We're talking about scope, we're talking about cost, and we're talking about time. It's not unusual for you to find in some manuals on project management that scope is also regarded as quality. But another way to show that is basically that you take out the quality out of there and you treat quality in the middle. Now at every one of the vertexes at the point of this triangle, there's a dependency and there's a relationship between these. If scope, time, and cost goals are achieved, then you have definitely achieved quality. And again, that's the importance of quality in the middle, meaning that it's basically a component of all three, scope, time, and cost, on a project managed and led correctly. So let's erase that stuff, and I'll do it the fast way. Occasionally you'll see the triangle is viewed as 4 vertexes. And that includes scope, cost, time, and then quality treated somewhat separately. And that's not the only way we can look at this. In fact, in the 4th edition of the PMBOK guide, you won't believe this, but there's actually a very brief mention, and it's not even viewed as the triple constraint. It's also specified as 6 elements involved that needs to be carefully orchestrated: scope, quality, cost, time, resources, and risk. That does make the whole issue complicated to get your hands around. In fact, that represents some of the major knowledge areas of the PMBOK guide. So the best way to look at this, though, is going back to what we had before. Okay, now we're all set. What's the overall impact of all these playing together well? Well, it's pretty easy. You have something called a satisfied customer that benefits from all these being done correctly. Your role is to balance and to be aware that management's desire to increase scope and maintain time and cost simply ain't going to happen. There's a rule. You enlarge or reduce one of these, and there will be an automatic impact to one or the other points. All this depends on maintaining quality, and of course you can determine how important quality is by what your customer expects. You certainly would assume that customers expect high quality. And again, the balance is making sure that there's a understanding and a commitment that scope and time and cost are all under your control, and you're carefully watching all 3 of those, which reflects the health of your project. So let's show what happens if you increase scope. The box at the top represents a major feature. Let's add a couple more features. Now what could happen with that is that when you add those other features, it automatically has an impact. It increases the cost and expands the time or the schedule. Alright, now let's see what happens if you reduce time. See that gray area there? And what can happen as a result of that, cost may be less, but certainly the scope may be less too. So what you see here is if you reduce the schedule time, chances are you're not going to get all the features that you want done. And lastly, tightening the budget could increase the time and reduce the scope. If you have tightened the budget, it automatically has an impact on scope, and chances are the time gets extended too. So that's not necessarily a good thing to do. A typical example of what can happen, especially with quality, is where a project isn't passing quality tests. So the PM basically adds more quality tests along the way. According to the Head First PMBOK, you'll find that your project is either late, it's over budget, or lastly, it's unacceptable to the customer. And you can see the relationship that quality can have with respect to scope, cost, and especially time. How does this relate to the PMBOK guide? Well, glad you asked, and I think we've seen enough of that picture. And there is a whole lot of processes in the PMBOK guide relating to risk management. And the triple constraint impacts all of these processes, and as you can see, they're all outlined. If you look at all of the PMBOK guide's knowledge areas, the risk management knowledge area has direct impact on scope management, time management, and cost management. And there's also one other you need to keep into consideration is the quality management. What about agile? Let's bring back that triple constraint, and just for good measure we're going to put quality right in the middle, which again is a very important ingredient. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could look at this triangle a little bit differently? What if we turn it upside down like that, and we replace the text with something a little bit different? Cost and time is fixed, and what is variable is the scope. And the beautiful part of this is that you keep the cost static, you keep the time static, and if you remember those packages that we have representing scope, what that generally would mean is that so long as you keep to cost and time, you focus on the most important features, meaning the scope, first, but you again have a project that focuses on the most important must-have features to be delivered, and that can be a win-win for everybody. So now you know.